السلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على أفضلهم وخاتم النبيين محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون صدق الله العظيم. Brother Saqib, Brother Justin, brothers and sisters in Islam, it is indeed an emotional moment. To be invited to speak to you today, perhaps for the first time in 20 years, on Malcolm, who is the only man to put an X behind his name. And in putting an X behind his name, he was sending such a powerful message to the slave master. A slave master who wanted to rob him of even his own name. A slave master who wanted him to become a carbon copy of the slave master. And so it was an act of defiance, unparalleled among slaves, to put an X behind his name. Malcolm X. I want to begin with a verse of the Quran with which you probably are not so familiar. It is in Surah An-Nuh of the Quran, the surah entitled Noah. And Allah tells us something about who we are as human beings, as men and as women, as men and as women. And if we want to know about ourselves, where should we look? He says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ وَاللَّهُ أَنْبَتَكُمْ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ نَبَاتًا. He doesn't say, وَاللَّهُ أَنْبَتَ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ أَنْبَتَكُمْ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ نَبَاتًا. And Allah has created you from the earth. He has brought you forth from the earth like trees and plants. And so if you want to know about people, look at the tree. They're not all the same. Inna sa'ayakum lashatta. You are different. There are some trees which are ornamental trees, handsome men, beautiful women, like the ornamental trees. But then there are other trees which are for timber, to make furniture. And you don't take a tree for timber and send it to the beauty salon to make an ornamental tree. No. And then there are other trees which are for food, and others for fruit, and others which are medicinal. And when Allah's Messenger went on the journey through the Samawat, and he reached to the farthest point, it was a tree. But it was a tree which gave the best shade of all. Sidratul Muntaha, the lot tree. So Allah also created trees which give good shade, like an umbrella. And so men are not all the same. The women are not all the same. And we must look to the aptitude of a person to see what kind of personality would come, what kind of possibilities there are for growth, what kind of versatility there is in this child. And so, once in a blue moon, a Malcolm is born. And for a few moments today, we will look to see what is it there was in Malcolm that made him so different from the rest. But what do we say of a tree which, when you cut it down, and that's what they did, and that's what they've been doing all the time since then, with their state terrorism and their Mossad assassinations of people. And an aeroplane drops out of the sky, and another American senator is dead. Another aeroplane drops out of the sky, and a president of Pakistan dies with an American ambassador on board. What do we say of a tree which they don't like this tree? So they decide to cut it down. What do you say of such a tree that every time you cut it down, it still keeps on growing? No matter how many times you cut down this tree, it just keeps on growing. That was Malcolm. And that is the Shaheed. And that was the verse with which I began. When Allah says, and the Mossad can take this and put it in its pipe and smoke it. Do not say of those who've been killed in the way of Allah, in the way of truth, in the way of justice. Don't say of them that they are dead. You can't kill them. No, they are alive, but you can't see them. There is a metaphysical application to the verse that they are alive in another world of space and time. But there is an application here that no matter how many times you kill Malcolm, Malcolm still lives. Because the truth for which he lived and died lives on. And that is as powerful a message as that any message can be delivered when we speak about Malcolm. It was September the 22nd of 1995. This is my book, Signs of the Last Day in the Modern Age. And there is an essay in this book on Malcolm X. And I couldn't remember the date, and then I remembered that this essay was there. And I went to the essay and I found it. It was September the 22nd, 1996, sorry. And I was invited to be one of a panel of speakers to address a subject beyond Malcolm X, the future of Islamic leadership in North America. And the program was held in Midtown Manhattan. I had arrived in New York a few years earlier, and my profile was quite high in the tri-state area. But wherever I had gone to speak, I was always speaking about Malcolm. So the African American imams were curious. Who is this fellow? Well, they don't say fellow, they say guy. Who is this fellow from the Caribbean island of Trinidad? And he's always talking about Malcolm, Malcolm, Malcolm. And word finally reached Malcolm's wife, Betty Shabazz, Dr. Betty Shabazz. So I was invited to address the gathering together with 3 other scholars, one of whom was Palestinian, one of whom was an African-American imam, and I can't remember who was the 4th. And Betty Shabazz was invited to come and listen. When I arrived at the hall in Midtown, Manhattan, I was escorted to meet with her, Malcolm's wife. She was sitting at the back of the hall, behind everybody else. And as I was introduced to her, I got scared because she didn't smile. Her face was very stern. So I was very uncomfortable. And then she explained that I'm sitting at the back so I can listen to you better. So I knew that I'm going to be tested tonight. And I began my address by saying that Malcolm lived for Allah, and that Malcolm died for Allah. And that's the future of Islamic leadership in North America. We need men with backbone, men with commitment, men who would live for Allah, and men who would be prepared to die for Allah. And then I went on with my address until I made a mistake. I pointed out that Malcolm was still learning about Islam, as our last speaker was saying. But as he learned about Islam, as soon as he understood something, he immediately accepted it. And one of the biggest problems of all of the world in the age of Malcolm, and since then it has been growing, has been the problem of riba. This is poison. Once you are injected with riba, it paralyzes you as an individual, as a nation, as a civilization. And you're incapable of fighting back because you are paralyzed because of riba. It is a new form of slavery. So I said that Malcolm did not understand the subject of riba. And the evidence is there in the autobiography that Alex Haley wrote. He dictated to Alex Haley, and I wish we could get those tapes. And then Alex Haley wrote the autobiography. That when his house was firebombed 1 week before he was killed, he went to Alex Haley and he got an advance to use as a down payment to get a mortgage to buy a house. Everybody buy houses that way, with riba, with bank loan and interest. And here is evidence that Malcolm did not know the subject of riba. Because if he had known it, he would never have done that. When the program was over, Betty Shabazz was invited to come forward and speak. And she took her time to walk forward. Oh, she walked forward very slowly from the back of the hall, and my heart is in my hand like that. What is she going to say about me? Because she'd been hearing about this fellow from the Caribbean, only talking about her husband. She came up to the platform, took the microphone, and began by her address by looking directly at me. The Imam said, "My husband lived for Allah." The Imam said, "My husband died for Allah." And the Imam is correct. I said, Alhamdulillah. But then she looked at me and not at the audience. "But Imam, he didn't sign the contract." He was killed before he could sign the contract. So he didn't die in riba. She looked at me very fiercely when she said that. That was a very an unforgettable moment. The fierceness of the loyalty of the wife to that husband. After the program was over, I had to leave to give another lecture elsewhere. And she was autographing copies of the autobiography. And she autographed one for me. And it was sent to me after the program was over. And I put it down here. I couldn't remember what it is she said. She autographed a copy of the autobiography for me, and this is what she wrote. "You are a leader for men and women of all ages and all times. And may the peace and blessings of Allah forever guide you." And she signed Haja Betty Shabazz, Mrs. M.X. A few months later, she died. So I met her only once alive. And I want to spend a little time sharing with you the news of her death, because it has so much to do with Malcolm. Betty spoke publicly, and it was published, that she accused Louis Farrakhan, but they called him Minister Louis Farrakhan. She accused Louis Farrakhan of responsibility for her husband's murder, assassination. She did it publicly. And when she was questioned about it, she said, "But it was common knowledge. And the members of the Nation of Islam even boasted about it." And when Louis Farrakhan was questioned, he said it. No, I think he did it in a public lecture. He was a traitor. And if we dealt with traitors the way we did, what's that problem to you? So we considered Malcolm to be a traitor, and we dealt with him the way we deal with traitors. And so the children, he had 6 daughters. 4 of them were already born by the time he died. And 2 more were born after his death. They were twins. She was pregnant when he was killed. So in all 6. The first daughter was Ata'Allah, and the second was Qabila. And then there was Jamila, there was Malak or Malaka, and I can't remember the names of the other 2. Because she publicly accused Farah Khan of her husband's murder, it was there embedded in the hearts of all the daughters. But the Million Man March was supposed to make Louis Farah Khan the undisputed leader of the African American people. And the Million Man March was in October 96, perhaps. And there was a big stumbling block in the way of Louis Farah Khan's Million Man March succeeding. A million men marching to Washington. And that stumbling block was, of course, the tree. No matter how many times they cut it down, it just keeps on growing. That was the stumbling block. And when you are capable of connecting the dots of history, you're able to see a pattern. They wanted Farah Khan to become the undisputed leader of the African American people, as he had become the leader of the Nation of Islam. They wanted that version of Islam which Farah Khan stood for to become the big one, and a man like Farah Khan to be the leader, so they could use him as they used the Soviet Union and as they're using ISIS today as their bogeyman. You need a bogeyman. So Farah Khan was supposed to be the bogeyman. So what can we do to help Farah Khan? Without Farah Khan even knowing that we are helping him. What can we do to help Farah Khan to become the leader of the African American people? Since Malcolm X stands in the way, what can we do to get rid of Malcolm? And that is what led to Betty's death. Qabila was vulnerable. And who would not be when you were 4 years of age and you see your father gunned down? Even he was vulnerable, because his father was assassinated. Malcolm's father. They found his body on the rail track. Assassinated because that man stood up for the truth and for justice. And when Malcolm's father was assassinated, his mother lost her mental health and was admitted into a mental asylum, mental hospital. And then all the children were scattered off into orphan homes. That's Malcolm's childhood. So if Malcolm went through that, you can imagine what Qabila must have gone through the second time around, the family. And she was falling apart. She had a child, and I recently learned the father was Algerian, and they named the child Malcolm. But Qabila's relationship with the Algerian was very short-lived. And she returned to the United States from France, from Paris. And she had a very, very, very rough life and eventually became alcoholic. and hence was vulnerable. And the the FBI use informants, and they use people to entrap you. Shame on you, FBI. Shame on you, FBI. Shame on you. To send people to entrap you. And that's what he did. She thought he was in love with her. And together they made a plan. And he recorded it to assassinate Farah Khan. When she began to become hesitant about it and was trying to withdraw it, he is the one who was saying to her, no, we must stay with it. So if that case ever went to the court, the FBI would look terrible, terrible, if this case ever went to court. And then he handed over the tape, and she was arrested. And she faced 90 years in prison and about $2 million in fines for conspiring to assassinate. This was a bumper crap now, like what happened in France a few days ago. It's a bumper crap. You can benefit a lot from this. And so now Betty is vulnerable. The Million Man March is around the corner. We need to get this tree out of the way that is standing in the way. Malcolm. And so it appears to me, and on Judgment Day we'll know, that the deal was struck. A deal was struck. And Kabila, who had accused the FBI of entrapment, decided on a plea bargain, withdrawing the charge against the FBI, exonerating the government, agreeing to 2 years of counseling and good behavior. And if this were to be fulfilled, then after 2 years the charges will be dropped. 1 month later, this is 1996, somewhere around the month of May, Betty Shabazz meets with Farah Khan in public in Harlem, shake hands with him. And Betty agrees to speak at the Million Man March. I connect the dots, and it seems to me very much as though a deal was struck. The FBI must have been very pleased with this deal, that they didn't have to go to court. Because public opinion in the United States of America was becoming increasingly negative towards the FBI on this case. When Kabila had to go to the counseling for 2 years, the court ordered that her son, Malcolm, would stay with his grandmother. And she is in New York, Kabila is in California. The son is not only vulnerable, the son is lost. It's tragedy after tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And grandma is too strict with him. So something snapped. Something snapped. He was just 12 years of age. And one day, while grandma was out, he took kerosene or petrol and he poured it from the front door of the house, the carpet, to the back. and waited for Grandma to come. And as she entered the home, and she's walking along the carpet, he waits and then he strikes the match. And she's engulfed in the flames and suffers 80% burns all over her body. My wife and I rush to the hospital. And we meet all 6 daughters there. And for 3 weeks she lingered on until she died. I then got a chance to visit Malcolm's grave. They had him buried far away from Brooklyn and from Harlem, so that nobody will ever go to his grave. There were limousines which took us after the Salatul Janaza at the masjid in Lower Manhattan, Upper Manhattan. And when we went to the cemetery about 1 hour's drive away, for the first time I'm looking at Malcolm's grave. The same Imam who had led the Salatul Janaza for Malcolm led the Janaza for Betty. But before the body could be lowered into the grave, the daughters asked me to recite from the Quran. After the burial was over, Kabila then called me aside and asked me and my wife Aisha whether we would agree to take guardianship of Malcolm now that the grandmother is dead. So the court would have to appoint someone else. It broke my heart to say to her that we had our departure from the United States within 2 weeks of the funeral. We would not be in the United States. We had to go for an interview in Trinidad for the US immigrant visa, the green card. And when we returned to the United States the next year, Kabila called me to ask whether I would go with her to the juvenile detention center where Malcolm was being kept, about 2 hours drive. And unfortunately again, I couldn't make it with her, and I never had any contact with Kabila after that. But nor with any other daughters of Malcolm after that. But if the dots have been connected correctly, and they did make a deal to get Kabila off, and the deal was to appear with Farah Khan, shake his hand in public, and agree to speak at the Million Man March. I think that would qualify as an act of betrayal, because Malcolm would not want it. If they had not made that deal, and if Betty had said, I prefer my daughter to go to prison for 90 years than to make a deal. Well, public opinion in the United States would have been so powerfully in her favor that the government would have been in monkey pants. What can we do to ensure that this case does not come to trial? That's what they should have done. And maybe in making that deal, the writing was on the wall. And that's why she met her end in such a violent way. When Allah blesses a man or a woman with nur, as Malcolm was blessed with Noor. You're able to see what otherwise cannot be seen. And when you live for Allah, you never betray the truth. Not for $5, not for $500,000, not for $5 million, not even for your son or your daughter facing 90 years in prison. No. The reason why Malcolm remains today the most powerful of all examples of leadership is because I don't know whether he even knew of the verse of the Quran. But he embodied what Allah was speaking of in the Quran. When Allah says, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say, verily my prayer and my service of sacrifice and my very living and my very dying, everything is for Allah. So the head which bows in worship with Allah, before Allah, will not bow, will never bow to the slave master. Never. One of the most powerful lessons that Malcolm ever taught me. I was also a teenager once upon a time, you know. And I was also inspired as I was 19 and 20. When Malcolm spoke about the house slave and the field slave, and I wish the governments which now rule over the world of Islam would stop for a moment to study the subject of what's the difference between a house slave and a field slave. A slave is one who does not have his freedom. The slave master has taken it away for him. The house slave is the one who identifies with the slave master. He is an appendage of the slave master. He lives in the slave master's house. He cleans his shoes. If the slave master is ill, Malcolm says the slave will come to him and say to the master, we ill, identifying himself with the slave master. We got a lot of them today in the world of Islam. Their Qibla is in Washington. I better stop there and not say anything more. I could get into difficult explanations, so let's stop there. The Qibla is in Washington. We sick, we ill, slave, house slave. He is externally a slave and internally a slave as well. He has been colonized. Even in his mind and in his heart, he has been colonized. But then Malcolm spoke about the field slave, who may be externally a slave, but internally he's not a slave. Internally he is still a free man. And free men and free women cannot tolerate injustice and oppression. Only field slaves will submit to injustice and oppression. A free man will never submit to injustice and oppression. And that's the field slave. Yes, I am a slave, but internally I'm free. And because he has zero tolerance for injustice and oppression, he hates the slave master. And he hates the system of slavery and oppression. And so the slave master is scared of him. He's dangerous. Malcolm would say about the field slave, if the slave master's house is on fire, the house slave will be running for water to try to extinguish the fire. But the field slave will look at it and say, let it burn. Let it burn. That's the difference between a house slave and a field slave. And Islam, the message of Islam came to give us men and women who would have internal freedom within them, who cannot be colonized, who cannot be enslaved internally, and who therefore would have zero tolerance for injustice and oppression, and who would hate the slave master and hate the system of oppression and enslavement, and who, when the slave master's house is on fire, they say, let it burn, let it burn. This is Malcolm's legacy to us. And this is what we need today. Because the slavery that he had experienced in his lifetime is now even greater. I have to bring my talk to an end, but I cannot do so without bringing some eschatology into the discussion. It's not enough to say that Malcolm had courage, and that's what we need. That Malcolm had integrity. You couldn't buy him. No, he was not for sale. And that's what we need. It's not enough for me to point out to you that I did briefly that Malcolm had insight. He could see what so many others could not see. And that insight comes only when you have courage and you have integrity. That Allah blesses you with nur. But it's more than that. There is a mastermind whose goal is to rule the world from Jerusalem. And when he does so, to declare that I am the Messiah, Al-Masih. And the capacity to connect the dots of history will allow us to understand the emergence of Britain as a ruling state in the world, Pax Britannica. If Malcolm were present here today, oh, he would love this part of the lecture. Because he had a passion for understanding the world. And there was no one in that time who could explain this to him. None. Pax Britannica came into being as stage one of the process, which will culminate with that mastermind ruling the world from Jerusalem. Pax Britannica was the leader of the old world. the concert of Europe and the rest of Africa and Asia. But in order for the second stage to come, they needed a new Babylon, a new world, a shining light, a new vision of heaven, the greatest thing that mankind had ever seen in history. They needed a United States of America. But this is a land with only American Indian people who have the misfortune of living what today is called a primitive way of life. You know, a primitive way of life. Primitive people, they show respect for water. You know, primitive people, they show respect for rivers. And they almost will worship a river, and they love to see the lakes clean and nice, and the rivers. You know, primitive people, but we are civilized. We have progressed. We take all our sewage and we pump it into the rivers and into the lakes and to the coastal waters, and that is called progress. So the American Indian people live the primitive way of life. And Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran directs attention to it when Zulkarnain went on his second journey. لَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُمْ مِن دُونِهَا سِتْرًا. Allah is so economical in His language. لَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُمْ مِن دُونِهَا سِتْرًا. And Zulkarnain, because power rests on the foundations of faith, he had the integrity and the compassion and the wisdom to allow that way of life to remain undisturbed. But he is Karnain, not two horns, no. Karnain means two ages here. And so there is an age which is to come when Gog and Magog will behave the opposite. And the primitive way of life would be destroyed so that a new Babylon, a new heaven rather, could emerge in North America. You can't build it overnight. That's what they did. They built it overnight. What Europe took hundreds of years to build, they had to build it overnight because Pax Americana has to succeed Pax Britannica. And in order to build it overnight, you have to do what Pharaoh did. He built the pyramids with slave labor. And so they had to build America with slave labor. And that's why they had to take Africa out to build America. But who cares about that today? When you leave Egypt and you leave Pakistan to go to heaven, to live the good life in the United States, that the United States was built with African slave labor. Well, those African slaves who become house slaves, we don't have to worry about them. We could put one on television and make her a star called Oprah. We could put others out there and make them boxing stars. We could put others out there and make them musicians, and and they will become entertainment, and they would constitute no threat. But what do you do with the field slaves? We must ensure that they all become Christians. Our version of Christianity, the Western Christian version of Christianity, which says you mustn't grow a beard. The only one who is allowed to have a beard, and a big one like that, and who visits once a year with reindeers flying to the sky is a fellow called Santa Claus. Everybody else, shave off your beard. I'm talking about that version of Christianity. I call it the Santa Claus version of Christianity. Not the other one, which is in Russia. This one wants to make all the world carbon copies of itself, this Christianity, which allies itself with Judaism and makes a Judeo-Christian alliance. And the Quran speaks about it if you have the time to read my books. But that Christianity has not made an alliance with Judaism. The one which still has monasticism, Rahbaniyah. That Christianity does not want to make carbon copies of itself all over the world. No. Orthodox Christianity in Russia and in Greece and in Bulgaria and in Armenia and in Syria and in Egypt, Orthodox Christianity does not have that agenda of transforming all the rest of mankind into carbon copies of itself. When will you wake up? So the African American people must become carbon copies of this version of Christianity, so we can box them in. But there's always the danger of Islam, because Islam was the dominant religion of Africa and we're taking the slaves from Africa. So we must give to them a version of Islam so that the field slaves will be taken for a ride. There are many in the United States, when they listen to this lecture today, are going to be very angry with me. But the truth is the truth. The Prophet ﷺ warned about many Dajjals. He said, Dajjaluna kadhabuna qaribun min 30. There would be so many Dajjal, there will be almost 30 of them. Before Mr. Dajjal himself comes along. And they'll all claim to be a prophet. They will all claim to be a prophet. And Elijah was taken for a ride. He claimed to be a prophet. And he said that Allah came in the person of our Muhammad in Chicago, of all places. And appointed him as a prophet. And so was born this version of Islam. But that is only the fun part of it. That's not the serious part. And Louis Farrakhan knows that very well. He's a very intelligent man, incidentally. Farrakhan is a very, very intelligent man. I sat down with Farrakhan one-on-one, he and I alone in the room, for 3 hours. 3 hours. And I knew I was sitting in the presence of a very intelligent man. So he knows where he misses. He knows that's rubbish. The real dangerous part is elsewhere, not there. This business about Farad Muhammad is God and appointed his prophet, he knows that's rubbish. It is the Ahmadiyya movement. The Ahmadiyya movement of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was up to its neck with the Nation of Islam, indoctrinating the Nation of Islam to the extent that Walis Muhammad died with those beliefs. W. Muhammad. That Jesus isn't coming back. Nabi Isa alayhi salam is dead, he's not coming back. That Mirza was the Imam al-Mahdi. In other words, give them a version of Islam whose eschatology is all rubbish. And when your eschatology is all rubbish, you cannot read history. That's what they did with the Nation of Islam. But in the same way that Allah took out of the palace of Pharaoh, He took a child into the palace, put him in a basket on the river, and the basket went to the palace, and the child was brought up in the palace, who will one day topple the crown of Pharaoh. So too, from within the bosom of the Nation of Islam, Allah brought out a diamond of Malcolm X. He knew that he was going to die. His friends were all saying to him, they're going to kill you. We want to send you to Africa. Go and spend 6 months, let everything cool down. He said no. Malcolm didn't run away. He knew he was going to die, and he was not afraid to die. He did, in that short period of time, he did all that was needed for him to do, to set an example of defiance against the oppressor. That they can do what they want. They can pull off all the false flags that they want, but the truth will always triumph. We just had a false flag in France 2 days ago. My anticipation is the next one is going to be in Germany. This one was intended to mobilize French public opinion to ensure that the government of France is stuck. The government wants to get out of the sanctions against Russia. I think the German government is also beginning to think the same way. So their plan is to get public opinion to ensure that the government cannot move in that direction. So this is not going to be the last false flag, the one that they just had in France. There are others coming. But when you have someone like Malcolm, you would know that no matter how many false flags there are, no matter how many nations of Islam there may be, with how many Elijah Muhammads they have, no matter what they do to try to make Farrakhan the new Messiah, the new messenger, that the truth will always triumph if you stay on course. That they can kill a man as they killed Malcolm, and some of us might also be killed, but they cannot kill the truth. I pray that from amongst you who are here today and those outside who will listen to this talk, that Allah will put into your hearts that love for freedom, that you ensure that you never internally colonized and internally enslaved, that love for justice, that you will never submit to injustice and oppression, regardless of the price you have to pay. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Question is to Sheikh, in Islamic eschatology perspective, in Malaysia, what is your opinion if Malaysia agree with EPPA instead of trade in terms of Islamic eschatology perspective? That is my question.
if Malaysia chooses to remain with the International Monetary Fund and the monetary system of the petrodollar monetary system and does not lend its support to BRICS, what would be the implications for Malaysia? I gave a lecture last night in which I answered the question in Shah Alam. It really doesn't matter for Malaysia on this matter, because the BRICS challenge to the petrodollar monetary system is already sufficient to threaten to topple it. And as a consequence, nuclear war is now inevitable. They cannot allow the petrodollar monetary system to collapse. No, that's just not possible. In order to ensure that the petrodollar monetary system does not collapse, and if you want to know what is the petrodollar monetary system, please listen to my lecture last night in Shah Alam. It's already on YouTube. The petrodollar monetary system is already threatening it, and it's already showing signs that it can collapse. So whether Malaysia goes this way or that way, it's really irrelevant. The threat is already there, it is already acute, and it is now, they've declared war on Russia. Oh yes, they've declared war on Russia. But I believe there may be one or two skirmishes, small wars, before the big war comes to intervene. What happens after the Malhama, the big war, the Armageddon? What happens after that to the world of money? I think we did not deal with that in today's talk now.
Sheikh. I've come from overseas, just like I did last time, from the US on 16th October.
Oh, okay.
At our university.
Okay.
University.
Where do you come from?
Singapore.
Oh, Singapore. Okay.
Pakistani origin, if you remember. Anyway, I've got two questions. My first question is that.
Oh, one at a time, please.
Okay, one at a time. My first question is that in your book, Jerusalem, the Quran, you've referred to the suicide bombers as shuhada, and as my understanding is that suicide bombing and the killing of innocent people is prohibited. So I just need some explanation on that. And
yeah, that's your first question.
It continues in the same book. You've referred to the Taliban as they follow the school of thought of Deobandi. So is the Deobandi school of thought accurate? And yeah, can you just explain, please?
Well, I would have really much preferred questions which would have been relevant to our topic, because these are not very useful diversions, not very useful, when the focus of attention is on Malcolm X. So, number one, I don't think I've ever spoken about suicide bombers in my life. I don't use the term suicide bombers. Somebody else may use it, okay? And number two, I've stopped using the word Taliban long ago. You can go into my lectures, you can go into my writings. The last time I may have been used the word Taliban must have been about 20 years ago. I've stopped using the term, because I don't want to have to answer questions about Taliban. Please try to ask questions which will be relevant.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Imran Hosein from Indonesia, Jakarta.
MashaAllah.
Sorry, Sheikh. Maybe my question with out of context, but still compatible with Akhir Zaman. I have heard many topics from you, from your lecture. Here I want to ask you about your opinion in the topic, the return of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. Your explanation is very interesting, especially from Ayatul Quran which explain Nabi Isa that Allah said, "A'udhu billahi minasyaitonir rajim." You are not kill him and you are not crucify him, but like a parent. There is a theory which is called theory of substitution. They said Allah calls someone else to assume that appearance of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. And many ulama takes that opinion, especially in Indonesia. I have heard from them the opinion theory of substitution. And my question is, what the implication from the theory of substitution, and what the real story from Kalamullah walakin shubbiha lahu? Thank you.
I'm going to have to postpone my answer to you for another day, because this is not our subject for today. But I have in Jerusalem in the Quran, you will find a chapter on that subject, and also in my public lectures, an Islamic view of the return of Jesus, Nabi Isa alayhi salam. I have spoken on that subject, okay? It's going to take some time, and in the process we're going to be diverted from what we are here for this evening. So we're going to have to take a rain check on that.
Any remaining questions?
Sami. Walaikum salam wa barakatuh.
I have a question for our brother. Yeah. I want to know what is your view now of the hip hop today? Because I'm from the hip hop, and I was influenced about the music before dancing, etc. And for me, it's definitely like in France. Sorry, I'm from Paris. Definitely for me.
Wait, you're Algerian first.
I'm Algerian first, of course.
Right, then you're French.
Okay, I'm born in France and I grew up in France, but I'm definitely Algerian. So for me now, the hip hop is a project. It's a project for the youth to control the youth, the young people. And what is your view now? Maybe it's personal, or what is your view now of the hip hop industry today?
Thank you for that question. I don't really have an opinion on the hip hop industry so much because I don't think I'm a part of it. I've been making and performing hip-hop music since 1999, but alhamdulillah, I don't think I've ever been caught up in the industry side of it so much. As in, I've never been signed to a label because no label will want me anyway. But to your point that hip-hop is a project to control the youth, that is what you said? Yeah. Hip-hop, just like any other art form or any other craft or any other skill that you pick up, it's a medium, I think. And in fact, if you look at the history of hip hop, I think it started in 1973 not as a tool for others to control the youth, but for the youth to control their own lives, as in to express themselves, to have a political voice. As in, when it first started, people have this idea that hip hop started whole meal. I mean, in whole, everything was there. The music, the DJs, the b-boys. But I think it started from graffiti, and it was a series of signatures all over the city, letting people know that no matter how oppressed I am, no matter how disadvantaged I am, and no matter how marginalized my community may be, I still have a voice, and you are still looking at something that I wrote on the wall, and asking, what does this mean? And that was the start of it. Of course, I mean, now that hip hop is 42 years old, yeah, more or less, 2015, yeah. It's 42 years old, and of course it has been co-opted in many ways, in many situations. Like you said, the industry is what it is, you know. Of course it's show business, but business comes before the show. Yes, just like any other art form and just like any other musical genre or, you know, any kind of content you see in the media, people are using it for negative purposes. But as members of the hip hop community, as young people, because hip hop is by definition a young person's game. I'm about to be, you know, disqualified from it very soon. You have to take control of it. It's a tool. I mean, it's a car, or it's a hammer, or it's a, you know, you can drive your car to the mosque, or you can drive your car to the nightclub. And that's how I see it personally.
Sheikh, if it's possible, I'll ask a question.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. There were three major students of Elijah Muhammad. There was Malcolm X, who broke with Elijah Muhammad. There was also Farrakhan, who remained loyal to Elijah Muhammad. And there was also Imam Warki Muhammad, who broke with Elijah Muhammad, and the one that Malcolm X had the most respect for and went to for counsel. I want to find out, what are your thoughts about Imam Warki Muhammad and his works?
The Nation of Islam had the annual convention, I believe it was in Chicago, before Malcolm could be buried. Am I correct? Good. Warisuddin Muhammad had broken with his father, and Malcolm had an alliance with Warisuddin. When Malcolm was assassinated, Warisuddin went back to Chicago, and he was put on the public platform to beg for forgiveness and to be accepted back into the fold. Before Malcolm could be even buried, before Malcolm could be buried, he betrayed Malcolm. These are not uncharitable words to him, not at all. These are facts. And who knows which of us would have had the courage to stand up with Malcolm after what had happened to Malcolm. Okay? So he went back to his father and he sought forgiveness, even knowing that the reasons for which he broke with his father and for which Malcolm broke with his father were valid reasons. This cannot be an exemplary profile of courage, no. This cannot be an exemplary profile of courage on the part of Warisuddin. He went on after his father's death to lead the movement and to attempt to create a new North American fiqh, North American school of law. Islamic school of law, which lacked an understanding of what was the master plan of the slave master really. That you cannot stay within the corporate world of riba and carve out a niche for yourself of business success. Our last speaker is a graduate of the MIT, so he knows what I'm talking about. He was also born in the island of Trinidad in which I was born. You cannot seek to carve out of that corporate world built by riba a niche for the African American people of business success. No, it shows a lack of understanding of the system of riba which the slave master had given. And this was a weakness in the intellect and the knowledge system of Warisuddin Muhammad. Nor did I ever see in him and in Farrakh Khan and in the Nation of Islam since then any understanding at all up to this day of the very defective eschatology that they had got from the Ahmadiyya movement. I don't want to speak uncharitably about the man. Allah has called him away from this world. And there are millions of people, of African American people, who still have very, very sympathetic views about him. So I want to confine my remarks to these three things. Number one, that this is not a profile of courage that impresses me. That before your friend Malcolm, your brother Malcolm could be buried, you abandon him and run back to your father and beg for forgiveness. Number two, that you cannot carve out from the riba world of corporate business a niche for the African American people of business success and hold that as a model, when rather you should be attacking the system of riba and offering an alternative to it. And number three, that the eschatology that Warisuddin Muhammad had all through his life, and Malcolm and Farrakh Khan still has, and Elijah had, was taken wholesale from the Ahmadiyya movement of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadian, and it is totally corrupted and defective. And they should come to our eschatology to understand what is proper eschatology in Islam.
Assalamualaikum. Okay, when thinking about the assassination of Malcolm X, I'm also thinking about the John Kennedy assassination. There is any actually connection between these two dots, right?
It was too soon. It was too soon for Malcolm to recognize what happened with Kennedy. It was too soon for all of us. It took us long time for us to understand that in the same way some of the aeroplanes have been falling out of the sky, and inconvenient senators in the US Senate are killed and assassinated, and King Faisal of Saudi Arabia is gone, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is gone, and Ziaul Haq is gone, and so on. So too did Kennedy go. That American president who steps out of line cannot survive. That's why Barack Obama watches every step he takes. Malcolm, it was too soon for Malcolm to understand the real story of Kennedy's assassination. And so he made the comment, which got him into trouble, that as an old farm boy myself, I'm not surprised when the chickens come home to roost. And that comment of his got him into infamy. But yes, there is a connection between the two, that the same slave master who wanted Malcolm out of the way is the same slave master who wanted Kennedy out of the way. And then Kennedy's son, the little child John, who grew up, he also, another aeroplane fell out of the sky, and John Kennedy Jr. also went away.
Any further questions?
I wanted to ask about the topic about the influence of Malcolm X on the hip hop industry. During your presentation, you gave a few examples of rappers who had different names. Lil Wayne, Kanye West never changed his name. And I just didn't see any connection between the changes that were made in Malcolm X's life and these superficial names, these stage names that these rappers made. Like, I'm from America, I live there. I mean, Malcolm X went to jail and developed as a human being. And, you know, he had a historical awakening, and he changed his name. These people got signed by a record company, and then they created a stage name. So I really didn't see the connection. I don't think Lil Wayne was inspired by Malcolm X to become Lil Wayne. I don't know. Maybe you know something I don't know, but I don't think that's a fair connection, because we're talking about one person that's developing and another person who's pretty much degenerating. Right. Okay, and then
visibly.
Yes, and for you probably know. And then also the picture of Malcolm X. Sorry, picture of Malcolm X that you showed, you know, with him holding a gun. If you might be aware, it was recently, as many people say, misappropriated by another singer named Nicki Minaj, and she tried to put it on the cover of one of her labels, and it's called something very bad. I don't want to say the name of it, but if you're familiar with hip hop, it's there, and they put that name, and a lot of the African American community came out against that. So I didn't see any examples of anyone in hip hop who was clearly, positively influenced by Malcolm X. Maybe Public Enemy and these previous guys, they were, you know, conscious and doing some things. But from the current people, I would not even put their names next to Malcolm X, because I don't see anything in common. So maybe you could clarify that.
Sure, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I was kind of hoping someone would bring that up. But yeah, someone like as we discussed, Lil Wayne has very little in connection to what Malcolm X went through. But Malcolm X himself had his impact on the way people look at the process of transformation, of how do I, you know, tweak myself a little bit, modify my outward and inward presentation so that I can be a better person for tomorrow, in any sense of the word. That is, I think, quite prevalent in hip hop culture. The fact that, well, earlier on in hip hop history, MCs changed their names not directly because of Malcolm X, but because they wanted to avoid arrest warrants. They wanted to, you know, they wanted to not use the government names, and therefore they chose the pen name instead when they went on to perform. And like I said, also during my presentation today, that Malcolm X himself was almost never sure of what he was doing. He just kept on trying to see what fit and how things would be different for him were he to do something different. Would he become a different person? Granted, a lot of the examples I put out are mainstream artists, people who, like you said, are signed to a label, who are most probably and if not guided, I'm not sure if that's the right word, or pressured by the A&R executives to rebrand, or this year you're wearing something else because you've got new sponsors now. But yeah, that concept of reimagining yourself, especially in hip hop culture, owes a lot to what Malcolm X went through, for better or for worse. His decision to constantly reinvent himself inspired a lot of people in hip hop culture to do the same. Whether for good or for ill, that's not for me to judge. I mean, that's on each and every individual. If you want to reinvent yourself, if you want to rename yourself, as I did. I mean, Words Manifest is my third MC name. The first two were not so good, which is why I don't use them anymore. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to get it right the first time. I mean, I think that's one of the major lessons that Malcolm X taught us. Just keep trying.
Thank you. At this point, are there any further questions?
No.
Okay, we'd just like to thank both of our speakers and just for their thoughts, and hopefully, inshallah, through the program, you've got a bit of insight on an individual who still has a big impact for all of us, and someone who I hope you'll take some steps to explore further. We have the autobiography, a copy there, so you can just look, and but do try and get your own copy as well. At this point, before we break, just one reminder of an upcoming event that Unriba will be doing. It's called Understanding Money. It's a 3-part series lecture series that will be held at UIA, and the details are in the flyer available near the registration counter. And the basic idea of the Understanding Money lecture circuit is to look at money as more than just a tool of exchange, a medium of exchange, but what Islam actually says about money. What are the standards that we should be using as money? And it really explores the topic in depth, but from an introductory level. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the topic of what money is, this will be a very good opportunity to learn the basics. And if you can take a flyer here, it'll have the information. To register, similar to this program, you just have to email unriba@gmail.com, and we'll process your registration. And that begins on the 14th, which is Wednesday, and the other parts of the series are on the 21st and the 28th. And before I split, I'd just like to remind those of you who haven't signed your name in for the registration to do so before you leave, and just enjoy some savory snacks as well. And I think at this time we'll break for Salah. So we'd like to thank you all again for your participation in this event, and inshallah we'll see you at future events as well. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Okay.
Thank you so much for